Welcome to the February session of BusinessWise Insiders. It's what promises, I hope, to be the highlight of your February, our monthly session of Insiders here. And shortly, I'll kick things off with our presentation. And to ensure everyone can hear me over the sound of their brewing coffee or whatever, I'll place everybody on mute for the duration of the presentation, to just minimize some disruptions. Our presentation will last 20 or 25 minutes. After which we'll dive into a breakout session, as I said, and that's really your cue to mingle and voice those burning questions, swap stories, or challenges from the business trenches, and dive deeper into what we're going to be talking about today. Also, if you have a question during the presentation, feel free to drop it into the chat window. If we can, we'll try to get to it during the presentation, but if not, we'll address it later in the breakout discussion. So without further ado, let's dive into today's topic. So today we're going to look at why and how successful sales reps use the power of the concept of social proof to compel prospects to give them their time, attention, and business. We're going to look at the concept of social proof from a few different angles to show why the stories of your successes are such a powerful tool in your biz dev toolbox, and how the best sales reps incorporate the concept of social proof into their cold outreach specifically, including ideas that you can steal for more compelling cold call and email scripts. And one of the biggest reasons social proof is such a powerful biz dev tool is because there's a very strong psychological component to the idea that other people have taken an action and benefited from it. So let's take a quick B2B psychology quiz. What are the deep-seated subconscious reasons that your prospect decides to act, to say yes to take your cold call, to click or reply to your email, to agree to a meeting, and of course, eventually, hopefully, to buy your product? You know, prospects get dozens of cold calls and emails every week. You know, because you all probably receive them yourself, some of which they act on and some of which they ignore. And timing and need are obvious reasons to skip or reply to a specific cold call or email, but they don't always explain why some prospects answer, open, click, respond, and meet, even if they don't have a pressing need for your product. So what we're really asking about is what other forces are at work here, and how exactly do they take the default state of inaction and nudge it toward action? And while we might like to think of ourselves as completely rational people who consider all relevant information and perform a rigorous cost-benefit calculation to guide our decisions, the reality is we're not. We don't have the time or the bandwidth to process information that quickly in the context of receiving dozens of emails and cold calls. So instead, our brains use mental shortcuts to help us make decisions faster. Now, our regular insiders will have heard us talk about Dr. Robert Cialdini's book, Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. Dr. Cialdini is a professor of marketing and psychology, and his book is based on that premise that people use mental shortcuts to help them make decisions faster. Dr. Cialdini identified 6 universal principles of persuasion, laying out specific triggers that activate those mental shortcuts. And in total, those principles are reciprocity, where people feel obliged to give back to others what they have received; commitment and consistency, where people like to be consistent with the things that previously said and done; social proof, which we'll look at today, where people look to the actions of others as a guide, especially when uncertain; likability and familiarity, people prefer to say yes to those they like and to whom they are similar; authority, where people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts; and scarcity, where people want more of the things there are less of. And I want to emphasize that these aren't gimmicks. They're psychological concepts that help explain how prospects synthesize information. And in the context of sales, they can be turned into strategies for clarifying your value, thereby nudging a prospect who's sitting on the fence and who may not yet realize that they can benefit from engaging with you toward action. And I'm going to start by digging a little deeper into one of those principles, social proof, to help understand why the act of somebody taking an action is such a power motivator for your prospect's action. And the framework is essentially that social proof sets successful sales reps apart because they understand how and why to share their own success stories in a way that unlocks their prospects' action. And you can see here on the right, our business-wise owls are role-playing that scenario. So the one on the top says, when I show my prospect how others have benefited from my ideas, products, and services, my prospect is more likely to find me credible and to give me their time and attention. So we're going to look at the psychology behind social proof, some real-world studies of how it works and why it's so powerful, as well as some specific tactics you can incorporate into your cold calls and emails. But before I do that, I just wanted to invite Deborah to offer any introductory remarks about the presentation. Sorry, Deb.
So one of the things we didn't mention, but that I'm sure is obvious to everyone, is that the persuasion principles work whether you have integrity or not. And we're assuming that everyone here is, when you choose to use these principles, are doing it with the utmost integrity. And we know that there are, unfortunately, annoying people out there that don't. But I just wanted to mention it because we're not suggesting any kind of untoward manipulation when we talk about this.
Exactly. Again, these aren't gimmicks. And in a way, because there are so many people that use them in a gimmicky manner, using them in a straightforward, credible way with integrity can really set you apart and actually build on some of the credibility that we'll be talking about in the context of social proof today. So let's take a closer look at the psychology of social proof, why people are hardwired to respond to it, and some real-world examples that demonstrate its effectiveness. As I already mentioned, social proof is based on the premise that people look to the actions of others as a guide, especially when they're uncertain about what to do. So in our example here, the owl on top is saying how much he and everyone he knows loves a certain product, which helps the orange owl at the bottom get past her uncertainty and take the plunge. But the reason social proof is so powerful is that it's about more than just receiving the assurances that come with someone else's experience. It's also about the drive to be part of something bigger, to be part of a team, or to avoid missing out on something that other people are benefiting from. So for example, one really interesting real-world study showed that people are more likely to reuse hotel towels when there's a note in their room indicating that a majority of other guests do so as well. So the guests weren't thinking, oh, reusing our towels sounds awesome when they read that note. They were motivated by the desire not to be seen as wasteful or out of step with the majority. And this example highlights how social proof influences behavior as guests adjust their actions based on the perceived norms and practices of others. And here's another similar example. Energy companies found that informing households of their higher than average energy usage compared to neighbors leads to a decrease in energy consumption. So again, this strategy taps into the homeowner's desire not to be perceived as energy wasters, motivating them to adjust their behavior to match the community standard. And in the context of business development, there are a handful of common ways that sales reps and marketers use the concept of social proof to entice people to act. One of the most common, and you're all familiar with it, is testimonials, for example, on your website. When prospects see the support and enthusiasm of your current clients, it creates a compelling reason for them to want to find similar success by using your product or service. Similarly, using detailed case studies can illustrate how you've successfully addressed the needs and challenges of your clients. These case studies help to make it real for your prospects, allowing them to envision the potential impact of your solution on their own businesses. And then finally, referrals from trusted sources, from cheerleaders. For example, a colleague or industry peer can serve as exceptionally effective forms of social proof. And it's something we've all tapped into, I'm sure, maybe without even knowing it. Deb, did you have anything on the psychology of social proof?
So I have something on testimonials that I always notice when these are on your website, or if you're giving them to folks. There's a big difference if I see something that says, Deborah from company X says something versus Deborah Klein from Business Wise says something. So I always feel the more specific you can be, the more credible you appear.
Yes, is exactly right. And I think more detail, more specificity, as we'll talk about in various points throughout this presentation, can enhance the power of social proof, which is a really cool and interesting idea. And you can see we actually mentioned it here on the slide, but to recap this section, here are sort of a few top line tips and ideas to remember. So first, again, the power of social proof is as much about FOMO, about fear of missing out, as it is about the substance of the endorsement. So witnessing the actions and decisions of peers can significantly amplify an individual's desire to engage and conform, leveraging the natural human tendency to not want to miss out on beneficial opportunities. And likewise, when prospects see that others have found success with your product or service, their own hesitation diminishes. People find psychological comfort in following the lead of a crowd, especially when it comes to making decisions in uncertain situations. And that's really key. Social proof works much more when you're dealing with someone who doesn't know what to do than it does when you're dealing with somebody who thinks they already have the answer. So this is about nudging people who are uncertain into a comfort zone, both in terms of fear of missing out and in providing assurances that this is a wise decision moving forward. And then finally, as Deb mentioned, you can really enhance the power of social proof with specificity. The detailed testimonials, precise data points, concrete case studies resonate more deeply than broad generic statements. Specific examples not only provide clear evidence of value, but also make it easier for prospects to relate and see the potential benefits for themselves and impose more intense pressure to conform. So let's turn to the next section where we're going to step up the intensity a little bit and look at how we can use social proof in the context of our cold prospecting, beginning with cold calling. And as we're going to see, it's challenging, but really effective when you do it right. And that's because cold calling by nature requires us to quickly establish trust and credibility without the benefit of a prior interaction and in a very tight time scenario with your prospect. So we'll take a look at a couple of strategies that can sort of turn that challenge into an opportunity and help to overcome the skepticism that you face on almost every cold call with the goal of building a connection going forward. So how can you use social proof to improve your cold calling results? So here's the challenges I just hinted at. Cold calling, especially those first few seconds, is really a battle against time. You only have 5, 10, 20 seconds to capture your prospect's interest and extend the life of that conversation. And if you can do that in the first, in the initial phase of the cold call, you can buy yourself a few extra minutes to get into, more of how and why you can help your clients. So at the beginning of the cold call, the strategic use of social proof really becomes invaluable. So by weaving in compelling stories of success and satisfaction from similar clients or industries early in the call, you can really quickly signal to your prospect that engaging with you is worth their time and attention. And the goal here is to demonstrate the tangible value that they stand to gain from the conversation. And if done effectively, social proof not only piques interest, but also lays the groundwork for a mutually beneficial exchange where you both get something out of it and where the prospect is more inclined to invest their time and attention. So let's look at a specific example. It's obviously pretty common on a cold call for your prospect to ask some variation of the question, who are you with? Or what is it you guys do? But even though that question is easy to anticipate, it's really hard to answer in a way that doesn't end up being a long-winded description of your product's features and benefits, which is the last thing you want to do on a cold call, where your focus should be on the things your prospect cares about. So here's an idea for how to answer that question that comes from Jason Bay of Outbound Squad, who we cite regularly in Insiders. As a way to avoid talking about features and benefits, Jason encourages what he calls a who, what, how approach, where you talk about what you do through the lens of somebody that you've helped. So when someone asks, what do you guys do? Here's an example of what you can say. Great question. A VP of sales I work with at a company name was in a situation facing a problem and where they wanted to achieve a goal. They used my help to achieve solution. I'm curious, what are you doing to address that problem? So for our purposes today, the critical element of this script is that it very smoothly uses the concept of social proof as a way of avoiding that features and benefits trap. Instead of talking all about your business and what you offer, you tell a story about how someone like your prospect has benefited from working with you. And critically, it ends with a question, putting the focus back on the prospect in a way that subtly stacks them up against this industry peer that you've just described helping. So it's a really smart and effective way of using social proof to navigate a particularly tricky phase of a cold call. So here's another concrete example of how to incorporate social proof into your cold calling strategy. This, in contrast with the last slide, is a voicemail script, and we call it the boomerang message, where you mention a client company of yours that is a competitor of the prospect you're trying to reach. And the idea here is to pique your prospect's interest by mentioning another company who they know and who's in a similar situation. Again, specificity. That potential social proof can be really powerful at generating a callback because it taps into the FOMO effect, fear of missing out, that I mentioned earlier. As soon as your prospect hears the name of his or her competitor, their desire to be in the loop kicks in, and it creates a really compelling urge to return the call. Now, of course, this strategy only applies when you're reaching out to a prospect that is a competitor of one of your clients, but we all have lots of those. And in those scenarios, the boomerang message can be a really effective way of using social proof. So what are the key takeaways here? And the first is, don't be a product brochure. Be a storyteller. Move beyond product descriptions to share how your product has enabled clients to achieve results. Those stories will resonate much more than a dry list of features and benefits with no connection to why they matter for your prospect. Second, as much as possible, provide hard data. Incorporate stats and quantifiable outcomes to enhance the resonance and relevance of your story for your prospect. And finally, again, specificity matters. The more you can reference people who are in a similar situation to your prospect, for example, their industry peers or their competitors, the stronger impact your message will have. Deborah, did you have anything to add here?
So all of this is so important, Sam, because we talk in many of our sessions about trying to think of things from our prospect's point of view. And whenever we do outreach to our prospects, they're in the stranger danger mode. They're likely to not want to be engaging with us. And we have to accept that. As much as we may know that our products and services can be helpful to that person when we are careful about targeting our market, from their point of view, they don't want anybody else calling them. They're fine with the way things are. And even if they're not, they don't trust us. So spending a lot of time and energy in figuring out what these stories are and what works can really propel you to success.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you could wave a magic wand, we would all obviously be able to tell a, foolproof, persuasive story about how we will be able to deliver results for our prospects. That's ultimately what they're looking for. We can't do that when we don't have a prior relationship and they have no specific reason to trust us. So the next best thing we can do is tell a story about how we've helped somebody who's almost exactly like them, and then give hard data to back it up. That's the way to shift from stranger danger to, wait a second, this is relevant to me because these examples are specific to me. Okay, so now that we've looked at social proof in cold calling, let's take a look at how to use the concept in a cold email. So here the challenge isn't so much the time crunch that we see with cold calling, but to capture the attention of your prospect in an inbox crowded with demands for that same attention and delivering your message in a way that credibly conveys value. And with so much competition in the inbox from so many unreliable sources, especially these days, emails generated by AI, spam, other gimmicky or unsavory attempts to grab your prospect's attention. The goal is to differentiate yourself with an approach that embodies credibility, to make your prospect really believe that they'll get value from a conversation with you. And social proof is a really effective way to do just that, because your past successes can help you demonstrate that you are a source of valuable insights and significantly increase the chances of your emails being read, replied to, and engaged with. So for this section, I thought it would be helpful to look at a few real-world examples of cold emails that use social proof in a couple of different ways. So here's an email from a company that advises clients on how to make their warehouse operations more efficient. Now, this is a great example of storytelling in action. So you can see he literally tells a story. I recently met with a warehouse operations manager about how to improve efficiency, and he asked me, "Do you have a warehouse stretcher?" Obviously, sort of a glib question. But then he goes on to say, excuse me, I was able to tell him that yes, in a way we do. He was unaware that with some modest changes, he's able to do a lot more within the same footprint. And then very quickly, he incorporates a testimonial. Another client has told him that his team has literally redefined his space management and implementation proficiencies. So again, this is a great example of storytelling in action. Rather than merely describing his service, he weaves a couple of client stories together and even includes that testimonial. And this kind of success story is much more likely to resonate with the prospect than the typical feature dump. So here's another example from our own cold outreach, where the social proof comes in as part of the value proposition, where we ask the prospect at the end, would you be open to learning more about how we've helped other Charlotte B2B firms boost their results? Now, this is pretty simple and straightforward, nothing crazy here, but the idea here is that the social proof doesn't have to be front and center in your email or cold call. It can also be used to hint at the value of a longer conversation. So, we do whatever we can, obviously, to talk about the problems, priorities, challenges facing our prospects in a way that describes how we can help. But then at the end of the message, we suggest a conversation to look at specific ways that we've helped other clients that might be in a similar position. And then finally, here's an example. It's a little different from a company that helps improve sales performance at sales organizations. As you can see, it's more along the lines, at least at the beginning here, of the cold call script we looked at in response to the "what do you do" question. It uses the problems faced by other sales execs as a way to ask a question about the challenges the prospect is facing. So it says, the execs I've been speaking with recently almost always mention one of two problems. They're either struggling to find new leads or they're having difficulty closing deals with the leads they do have. I'm curious which of these challenges is a bigger priority for you right now. And then farther down in the email, you can see that the sender offers to share some case studies, again, similar to the example we just looked at, where they were able to help clients grow revenue by up to 40%. So social proof is at work here in a number of different and pretty powerful ways, including offering hard data to demonstrate the value of a conversation. So to close out the section and the presentation, just some key takeaways for email. The approach, execs I talked to, a VP of sales I recently spoke with, that type of approach really can provide credibility to your email by mentioning what you're hearing from other people who are like your prospect and using it as a window to ask a question. We saw it in the context of the response to the "what do we do" question, but it's just a great way of framing how you help clients and pivoting to what matters to the prospect you're speaking with. The second, again, hard data with client results. Include the results you've helped clients achieve, be as specific as possible, or offer to share them in a phone call or meeting. That can be a really powerful value proposition and engagement tool. And then finally, testimonials aren't always just for your website or your brochure. You can find creative ways to incorporate them into your emails. If you make sure that they're sort of part of the smooth narrative of the email, follow up on a story you've just told, like the example with the warehouse consultation group. But don't just leave testimonials to sort of your other marketing assets. They can be a very powerful way to boost your cold email results. Deb, did you have anything you wanted to conclude with?
This isn't exactly a comment on social proof. I did want to mention that since we've all experienced the accelerated change in business development This is certainly true for things in email. And while the close of your message with wouldn't 15 minutes of your time be helpful or some such thing, it's getting so overused that I would just be careful of using it in that way and picking one of the other approaches that Sam showed.
Thank you, Deb, and thanks everybody for attending. And we hope that you stick around for the breakout room.